The greatest promise Lazy Garden offers is that we will never have to weed or water our garden. So many of the things that make that work come from things that we learn by studying the forest. A giant garden that takes care of itself. Let's go take a little tour of the woods behind my house. We are very likely to find some chanterelles, but also, more than likely, a few lessons that we can bring home to our own gardens as well. Let's do this. Sorry, Adam, this is a bit of a hike. Apologize in advance, it's a little steep. Right where we're standing right now is a perfect example of what we're trying to emulate in our lazy gardens. So first we have the really tall trees, and under them we have a beautiful understory of somewhat shade-tolerant varieties of bushes. Then even under those, we have other shade-loving blueberries. And then down at earth level, we have a thick layer of bark, sticks, fallen leaves, acorns, moss, and all these other things that are keeping all of the good stuff in the soil right where it belongs. This soil too is absolutely incredible soil for so many reasons. And so as lazy gardeners, we really want to think about that, especially as we're planning how we're going to plant throughout the season. Because for me, I plant a ton of things that will grow super tall, super fast in the early season so that they can go soak up all that sunlight. And then in their understory, just like we have the smaller things here in the forest, I'll plant other smaller shade-loving things to then shade the soil. But then I'm also bringing all kinds of organic matter and covering all of the soil all the time so there's never anything left unexposed. To get to the goods, this early in the season, we gotta keep climbing. Oh, watch what happens when I split it in half. Milk comes out. This is called a milk cap mushroom, and you can often find these kinds of milk caps where chanterelles are also growing, so it's a good sign that we're in a good spot. And these are also technically edible, but I don't like them, so we're not gonna bring it with us either. Oh, you know what else we've got? So right down here, next to a whole bunch of chestnut oak acorns, is a charcoal burner. This is another species of Rusula that generally likes to grow underneath beech trees, but interestingly enough, this guy was growing right next to a white oak tree. Fascinating. Another really important thing that we as lazy gardeners want to emulate from the forest is the diversity of species. Forests don't monocrop, and in that, you have so many different things growing all amongst each other that not only do you have different heights of things making different understories that can absorb the sunlight differently, but you also have so many different things all growing together that there's very rarely a blight that will take out every single species all at once. There's very rarely one insect that will affect every single thing. And in that, if you do have a year where you have an especially aggressive viral disease or fungus or bacteria or insect population that comes through, like we do with our 177-year cicada population right now, we might experience a failure of one particular crop or a couple crops, but we won't experience a total failure everywhere you look. Check this out. So here is a bunch of wild blueberries that are actually ripe, which is a fun little find. And as it happens, most of the blueberries that I've planted at our farm, I stole from this very hillside. So we're getting some fruits even before we really deserve them. Love that. Right by these blueberries, we have a little rotten chanterelle, which we don't need to keep, but a couple of its friends. This is a Rusula, and some Rusulas are edible, some are not. The kinds that have a little bit of a spicy taste are the ones that are actually edible. Here's another one right here. I don't actually like these mushrooms, so I'm not gonna take them home, but I think it's super important to mention I don't normally forage in a target bag, but my mom was just here and she somehow lost all of my mushroom bags for me. So here we are. It's the climb! Oh, well, I guess the view isn't that great. But we actually want to go back down because we're above the mushroom line right now. If I wanted to be a good friend to my piggies at home, I would have an endless supply of beech nuts, hickory nuts, and acorns to collect for them. But there's a reason they're wandering around the woods on their own, because bending over and picking up that many things for them, not my job. So here we have another lactarius, or milk cap mushroom. Again, supposedly edible. This one's old, but I don't really mess with that stuff. Woo! We've got some nice red chanterelles in here. These are little guys, but one thing I really like about these ones is they're almost like a flare gun. They're so dang bright, you can see them from really far away. And usually, if we have the presence of some red chanterelles, we probably also have some other chanterelles too. So this is a good place to be looking. All right, my friends, this is what we were looking for, a true shanty run TM. This particular shanty run started right up there at that oak tree, and it keeps going on amongst all these other hardwood trees as we go down the hill. But you can literally see it there, 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 and it goes all the way down the hill. And my friends, we've just struck gold. And let me just say, that's not actually trademarked. I call these things shanty runs, chanterelle runs, mostly because they literally will run. Because as it rains really heavy, like it does here in Tennessee, it will wash the spores of the mushrooms down the hill, and then the mushrooms will start growing on the roots of different trees. Here's one of the biggest misnomers about mushrooms I've ever heard, is that mushrooms kill trees. It is actually true that a few species of mushrooms do actually kill trees, but chanterelles do not kill trees. They actually help them hugely. As lazy gardeners, we love chanterelles and other ectomycorrhizal mushrooms for a whole bunch of reasons. The biggest reason is that ectomycorrhizal mushrooms, like chanterelles, russulas, milk caps, and some of the other mushrooms we'll see today, mine phosphorus from the soil. If you've ever looked at any plant fertilizers, you'll notice that they have an NPK formula. That's nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Of those three, phosphorus is the most important when it comes to creating more plant material or organic material, aka it's the thing that helps the plant to grow bigger. And so we want to encourage ectomycorrhizal mushrooms to grow in our gardens as much as possible, because they'll create partnerships with our plants to actually make sure that our plants get the stuff that they really need to survive. You see these little white roots here? That is the start of a mushroom, but that mushroom can't actually fruit or turn into these delicious, delightful things that we're gonna eat without being provided with carbohydrates to be able to actually fruit. So we have the most beautiful partnership in nature here. The tree roots that these ectomycorrhizal mushrooms grow along provide them with the necessary carbohydrates that they need to grow and thrive. And then the mushrooms mine the surrounding soil for phosphorus, providing it directly into the tree roots where they're growing, which then send that phosphorus up into the tree, then giving the tree the opportunity to grow way more organic matter in the form of leaves, in the tree trunk itself. And then as fall comes, that's more organic matter that falls down to the soil, which then gives other different species of mushrooms more to eat. And round we go, where the soil keeps getting better and better. And this fly, my lands. The soil keeps getting better and better, and I get more and more irritated. Let's go find the rest of this shanty run and move on to our next point. Ow! Here's a couple good specimens. Knowing that this video was going to come out around Father's Day, I specifically chose the topic of the video so that I could use this as an excuse to tell you a little bit about my dad, who is my absolute hero. He worked for the Forest Service, he's a lifelong gardener, and he's an incredible photographer. In addition to my enormous smile and some of the funny ways my brain works, one of the other things I seem to have inherited from good old dad is my love of taking photos. But I have 62,000 photos on my phone, and I think many of you are probably like me, that you take photos all the time, but if they live in your phone, you're never gonna see them ever again. Which brings us to the sponsor of today's video, Aura Frames. The coolest thing about this digital frame is that it actually looks like a picture frame. It has the screen, very high resolution, it has the mat around the images, and you know, if it wasn't constantly changing the image, you'd think that it was just something that was sitting here on my desk. And I actually got my dad one of these frames for Father's Day because I knew he would love how technologically easy it is to use, but also because you can set this thing to automatically be updating and reloading photos in real time. They're just gonna pop right up on his frame and he doesn't ever have to go anywhere or do anything to make those appear. Digital frames like this are a fantastic way for families to stay connected, both with the sharing of images, but also, you know, seeing pictures of my dad reminds me to call him every once in a while. These are a great gift for loved ones anytime, but because it is Father's Day, we did get a special deal for you. If you use the link in the video description and put in the code TRADES at checkout, you will get a discount for Father's Day. Right here, we have some wild comfrey. And as gardeners, we love finding wild comfrey in the woods. Early in the spring, I'll often find these baby plants and just transplant them back to my own garden. But these are absolutely fantastic because comfrey will naturally mine nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the three main components from NPK, the fertilizer that we might otherwise have to go to the store and buy, and we'll use comfrey to make our own homemade fertilizer that will massively help our garden. But it also has some medicinal properties as well. If you remember my nacho stab wound, a serious injury, we made a video about this, I think it's called I Seriously Injured My Hand, and that I am very happy to report is mostly completely healed. I've lost my ability to give a thumbs up, but it's not 1993 anymore, so that doesn't really matter. I can still do all the wigglies and all of the important things, grab, have strength back. I can even use my little pinchers to pick mushrooms now, which is very, very exciting. But all that to say that I helped my 13 exterior stitches heal by applying a comfrey salve that I had made. And as we're harvesting comfrey, just like any of the plants in our own garden at home, we never want to harvest more than 1/3 of the plant at a time. The leaves of the plant are its solar panels. They are what collects the sun's energy and turns it into plant growth. And so we never want to take more than 1/3 of a plant at a time. And also, if we look closely at this particular plant, we actually probably don't want to take any of it because you can see it's been really damaged by various pests, and we don't want to A, risk accidentally taking any pests or pest eggs back to our garden, but B, you know, I'm sure we can find a better specimen very nearby. And right next to it here, we have a little baby redbud. Now, this is a little controversial, but because technically redbud trees are in the legume family, there has long been the thought in the permaculture community that planting redbuds along with whatever fruit trees we're planting is a great idea because legumes are natural nitrogen fixers, which means that these will trap nitrogen and then send it down into their roots and therefore into the soil to feed nitrogen, one of those three necessary components for plant growth, to the plants around it. However, some recent studies have also shown that though redbuds are technically in the legume family, they themselves are not actually nitrogen fixers. I would have to look at the science more, but planting a little baby like this alongside one of my fruit trees certainly can't hurt. Oh, look at that. A salmon chanterelle, dun dun dun, announcing the start of a shanty run. I have so many good things to show you. So far I've found 28 edible species of mushrooms in our backwoods alone, like the woods in our backyard. However, just because they're technically edible doesn't necessarily mean we actually want to eat them. This right here is the angel of death, also known as a white amanita, and this is the most deadly mushroom that grows in North America. We absolutely do not want to eat these ones. Interestingly though, their close relative, this one, is questionably edible. Some people say they eat them, but then they have gastronomic distress, aka tummy aches or diarrhea or whatever. But these actually start the exact same way. They start with a little egg at the bottom and turn up into the angel of death. Dun dun dun! So here's where the fun stuff starts though, because this smooth chanterelle, on some not so careful observation, looks a whole lot like these jelly mushrooms. And these jelly mushrooms are also a definite nope. We don't want to eat these. They kind of look like chanterelles in shape and everything else, but they're kind of see-through and we don't want to eat those ones. So those ones go bye-bye along with the lactade and some others. At peak mushroom growing time, like right now, there are a lot of potentially dangerous lookalikes to a lot of the mushrooms that we might actually be looking at. For example, we talked about the Hygophorus milkies. These two are also in the Lactarius family. They're called candy caps, which again, technically edible, although not recommended personally. But we have to be so careful when we're looking at these, because it's just as easy looking at one of these to mistake it with something that looks like that, or far worse, mistake it with something that looks like that. And this little guy is also a very toxic mushroom. This is a cone cap mushroom that I found growing literally right next to this candy cap. And yeah, right next to each other in my hand. They might look a little bit different, but when you're frolicking through the woods like a maniac looking for chanterelles, sometimes you don't have the most positive discernment abilities. Or maybe that's just me. And this is a rusula. These tend to grow in groups of 3 with chanterelles and milky mushrooms. And again, some people in some circles think that some versions of rusulas, this is another rusula mushroom, are edible. But when there's some of one species that are edible and others that aren't, I just really don't think that's worth the risk. However, you can actually take a little taste, as long as you spit out everything, don't swallow it, and taste to see if it's a little bit spicy. The rusulas that are edible are a little bit spicy. But raw mushrooms are disgusting, so why would we?
Wait, that's a toxic mushroom you just ate?
Arguably.
Okay.
This is a really poor example because it's been rained on so much, but a great example of another kind of mushroom that some of them are edible and some of them are not. This is a white coral mushroom, and the ones that grow out of the ground are not edible, but the coral mushrooms that grow out of wood technically are edible. Again, is it worth the risk? But as a disclaimer, please don't believe anything that I say. Look it up for yourself, do your own research. I will say that there are some really great apps for identifying things in the woods. I use Picture This for mushrooms and Picture This for plants. Not sponsored. I pay the $30 every year and it's worth every penny to confirm what I already know. But I wouldn't, as an absolute novice, just go out in the woods, take some blurry pictures with my phone, and then trust the internet to be able to tell me whether or not something would kill me. If you are interested in learning how to forage, the absolute best thing you could do is to ask an experienced forager, aka someone who's eaten a lot of mushrooms and hasn't died yet, to give you a bit of a crash course. Oh, the weather outside is, oh, some more. And right here we have stinging nettle, which is a delicious and delightful edible herb. You can make nettle soups. Actually, even though I don't really have a lot of time to watch TV, my absolute favorite show is Clarkson's Farm. Check it out, it's great. There was recently a hilarious episode about him harvesting nettles to make nettle soup, which is delicious. But of course, like most things in farming, trying to turn any of this into a business is real hard. Actually, speaking of which, I am doing a talk at the Modern Homesteading Festival in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho later this month, talking about how to monetize your homestead. This isn't the way, but there are some ways, and if you live in the Pacific Northwest, I'd love to see you there. So in here, we have a whole bunch of Christmas ferns, which we all know how much I love Christmas, so that's awesome. Although some people enjoy eating the very early growth of ferns, Christmas tree ferns are not in any way edible at any point in their growth cycle. However, right next to them here, we have some little dwarf dandelions, which are in fact edible. And so if we pick enough of these guys to take home with our mushrooms, then we can actually make ourselves quite a tasty little dish. And right near them are these pussy toes, which is, let's just giggle about that. But the Cherokee used to use plantain pussy toes to make a medicinal tea to help with digestion. But, I mean, not delicious, probably not super recommended that we actually eat them. However, over here we have silverrod, which is actually in the goldenrod species, and the leaves are technically edible if cooked. So you can use them like spinach in soups and stews, but you don't want to eat too much of them because they can be dangerous. You can also use the flowers as garnish, and they have kind of cool tap roots, which are also commonly used for medicinal things. But again, when it comes to things like this, where it's like, yes, you can have some, my general inclination is like, let's probably have none because yeah, we don't want to overdose on anything that's not even that delicious. So this right here is a Reese's cup, and I should absolutely be using the correct genus and species for all of these plants as I'm talking about them, but this is a gentle reminder, dear reader, that I am severely dyslexic, and pronouncing a lot of that stuff, not to mention just trying to remember the correct order of things, is nearly impossible. So give me a little grace, please, and thank you. Plus, it's way cooler to say pussy toe plantain than, you know, the actual correct genus and species. This right here is the mother lode. This is plantain, which is basically the exact same thing as spinach. This is a medicinal herb. You can use it for poultices. You can also cook it up with some chanterelles, and it is delicious. This is a somewhat unhealthy specimen of pokeweed, which is really interesting because it is edible when small, but it becomes poisonous when it gets larger. So if you're gonna risk it with the pokeweed, know when it's time to stop picking. These are pawpaws, which I have kind of been cultivating because this is where I cut my firewood. But pawpaws are the only tropical tasting fruit that also grows where it snows. So real big fan of the pawpaws. Right here, we've got some slug-infested wood ear mushrooms, which are both medicinal and edible and so delicious. Look at them. These little cuties right here. Do you hear what I hear? The most disgusting, weird little elf ears that ever existed. But we found some really big ones a little while ago, but this is like a perfect specimen. Every time I come back in the woods, I stop at this exact spot for a very specific reason. When heavy rains come, they wash a whole bunch of leaves down the hill. So the leaves that have washed down the hill here have touched the spores, in theory at least, of so many different kinds of mushrooms, and that is exactly the right kind of stuff that I want to bring into my garden at home. All right, not too bad of a haul here. We have enough food for several days worth of meals, as well as enough fertilizer, mulch, and mushroom fungi that's been naturally collected that we didn't have to do diddly to get. What we're gonna do here is take little handfuls of these leaves and stick them down into the soil underneath lots of our plants here, all over the place, to inoculate the soil with whatever good stuff the forest has to offer. Grab some of these, and here's the good stuff, my friends. We've got so many good chanterelles. We have lots of different varieties. We've got red chanterelles, also known as salmon chanterelles. We've got some white chanterelles in here. We've got some smooth chanterelles. We've also got these dandelion leaves. They're all delicious. We'll grab some garlic scapes, the top part of garlic that tells us it's almost ready to pick the actual garlic, but these things are so good. And then we'll combine lots of these different things to make a truly delicious and delightful meal. Here we've got some wood ear mushrooms, which grow on dead box elder trees. We've got some reishi, which we're not gonna actually eat. We're actually going to put these into the bee food and save us a few $100s on having to do anything about the bee mites this winter. And we'll probably do another video about that another time. But reishi mushrooms are great, my friends. And shoot, I'm so excited. Thank you so much for being here. I'm gonna go spread the rest of these leaves on the garden, light the fire, and cook up some delicious dinner. Oh my gosh, look at this little buddy. A little box turtle is in the garden. We're gonna put him right back where we found him, and he got a little shy when I picked him up, but these are so cool. That's why we've got to plant extras. Extras for everyone, in case we get some little friendly munchers hanging around.